Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I just want to. I saw there was like an outpouring for you on the on the Twitter about your poor dog. Sorry about the loss of your friend, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, David. She definitely reached the end of the line. She was 18 years old, which is a very ripe age for a dog, and she'd
Yeah,
just been hanging on for a while, and the time had come, and it's very sad on the day, but and today I'm feeling that we did the right thing. We done right by her, so
it's a good life for a dog. 18 years, as you say.
it's still odd. Like first time we haven't had a pet in our part of the house since the 90s. And so it's strange to come into the house today and have no furry receptionist. But I guess that'll probably change in due course. But to lose both of them in a couple months apart, especially this year with being homebound and all that, it stings. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. Well, the weather's finally turning, Bruce. The river's breaking up. There's
Hmm.
big patches of open water.
Hmm.
It's things are changing. It's good. We need things to change.
The sturgeon's opening up a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the things we've been digging into in our latest posts, or will dig into, I should say. But we're going to. So this is you're going to do a. You're working on a post on Ken Holland's trade record,
Yep.
and I'm working on a post on digging into our scoring chance data, and we're looking at not just how many mistakes the defenseman made on grade A chances against, but what kind of mistakes. Who made what kind of the mistakes that drive coaches crazy the most? And
Hmm.
those are things like turnovers. That always bothers a coach. Missed assignments where you're leaving the guy wide open in the slot. Bad line changes, the top of our list and probably the top of most coaches' list. Weak back checks, bad pinches, allowing a breakaway, and lost battles to some extent. They don't like to, someone gets whipped in a physical battle. That's never a good thing. So we'll dig into that. Bruce, I just want to talk, though, at first, though, Brian Burke and John Shannon were on Oilers Now. I haven't done a post yet about it. I might still. Um, Maybe I'll even do that tonight instead of the one I was planning. But they were both. Burke had been Shannon had been quite bullish on the NHL coming back for the playoffs this year. I can't. Bob Stauffer had asked a number of people what the odds were. I can't remember what Shannon said, but I do recall Burke being hopeful, of course, but saying they were pretty much zero when he was first asked this about 3 weeks ago. And I
Yeah.
think I was at 90% then, and now I'm at 99%. But Burke seemed to be changing his tune just a little bit
Good.
on Oilers Now, and talking about all kinds of different scenarios, as was Shannon. Burke was talking about 8 teams in the playoffs, perhaps not 16. That wouldn't be good, would it, Bruce?
Well, I think we're kind of ninth place the last time I looked, so no, it might not be good.
He talked about maybe coming back in August, maybe coming back at a quarantine site for some of the initial games. So it just seems like there's, again, he's really hooked into the NHL insider as much as anyone. Burke has got to know his whole life, his whole social scene and whole life to a certain extent must just be NHL people, right? Like he's
Yeah.
like, I think it was Mark Spector who talked about, no, it was Al Strachan who actually talked to me about once, like this little village of hockey people, and it's about
Yeah.
400 people, and they all know each other. So Burke's the town crier or something like
Well,
that. He used to be like the deputy mayor, and now but he knows, and he's talking positively. So I took that as a good sign.
he's lived in all their houses, right? I mean, he was an executive at the league level. He was a
Uh-huh.
player agent. He was a GM of 4 or 5 teams. He was even as a player, in university hockey, captain of his team, and sort of a go-to throughput kind of guy. I mean, that's the thing about those kind of positions is that, they talk and they make connections, and clearly he has a whole boatload of connections in the game of hockey. How could he not?
Yeah. So when he says something, when he's starting to talk
Yeah,
more
you got to
positively
listen.
about it, it's like, of course, Elliot Friedman, the most connected person probably in that, in terms of he's like the newspaper man in that little village, and he was talking about this quarantine idea. So it's just more bubbling along, giving me hope. And again, I don't see any reason why this quarantine idea can't work. And Burke brought it up specifically, playing in
Hmm.
the Flames versus the Oilers in North Dakota, a couple games at least. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Bruce, let's talk about your. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you want to move on to your?
Well, just if, it's like the old E.F. Hutton commercials, right? If when Brian Burke speaks, everyone listens. I mean,
Mhm.
he must be hearing something. Now, that said, I mean, we're all kind of on the outside looking in terms of knowing what's going to happen next. I mean, even the politicians don't all seem to have a completely firm grasp on that, he said with tongue in cheek.
They don't.
Well,
Um,
nobody does. I
Nobody
mean,
does. No one can guess the future. So, or no one knows the future. We can all guess at it.
right.
Bruce, let's talk about your post, the Holland
Sure.
post. So you're looking at Ken Holland's trading record,
Mm.
both in Detroit and in Edmonton. How far back are you going into Detroit?
I went back to the trade deadline of 1998, so
Holy
all all
moly!
all the way back, just to see what his tendencies were.
Did you see it?
And
Did you find that useful? Because
oh yeah,
so much changed in like to
hmm
go back that far. The rules have changed so much
no,
in
I no,
terms.
I understand that.
Okay, go. I
And
know you know that, but did that not kind of nullify what happened before like the new CBAs with revenue sharing?
well, it still tells you something about his tendencies. What's he doing at the trade deadline? Because this year he made altogether officially 6 trades with the Oilers, and 4 of them were on the deadline. And that's been his past MO. He does most of his trading at
Okay,
the trade deadline, and a little bit in the off season, and at the draft he tends to swap a trade up or trade down. Just trading draft picks. But very very little in the way of big player for player trade. So the very first, what remains his signature moment as GM of Edmonton Oilers, trading Milan Lucic and his four horsemen of the apocalypse contract to Calgary for James Neal. It's very much out of character for Ken Holland.
okay.
It's not
Let's just stop. What are the horsemen of that
uh,
contract? Too
term,
much term,
cap
no,
hit,
no movement
bonus
clause.
structure, no movement clause, and you're hemmed in on all 4 sides.
Yeah.
It's like the old politician said when he was caught dead to rights lying about something, and he said, I feel like a dog that's surrounded by 4 trees. I haven't got a leg to stand on." And that's what the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse contract was. There was no way to get out from under it other than somehow convince the player to accept the trade and somehow convince some other team to take him. And Ken Holland managed to achieve both those things in his first summer on the job. So that was his signature moment, but that is not how he usually does business. He's done very few one for one, player for player trades over the course of his career. And when he has, it's sort of been second tier players. Jason Williams for Kyle Calder kind of stands out as, an actual hockey trade where it sort of equals trade. By far, his preferred trading format is buyer to seller at the deadline, trading draft picks for a team that's out of the hunt, and loading up with rentals for the team that's in the hunt. And he did it over and over again in Detroit, and over again he picked up a veteran defenseman. I mean, here's a defenseman he picked up in his first 6 or 7 trade deadline trades in Detroit: Jamie McCown, Dmitry Mironov, Chris Chelios, Ulf Samuelsson, Todd Gill, Yuri Slager, Matthew Schneider. And all of them were over 30 years old at the time. And I mean, Chelios was 37, Samuelsson was 35. Like, these were not young men. These were ancient veteran defensemen. And you know what the first trade he made as a trade deadline for Edmonton Oilers was? He traded for Mike Green, 34-year-old veteran defenseman, just to shore up the back end a little bit. Like, it just seems to be part of his philosophy. You can argue whether it's right or wrong, but you can't argue that he seems to think that it's important.
I'm not going to argue it's wrong. And I'm going to give you full credit for going back that far at this point, because I'm dead wrong in questioning that. Like, you clearly, you found this
Jumps off
tendency.
the screen.
Because I did a study on him just when he came here, just as he was coming here,
Mhm.
and I see what you're saying. I have all the dates of, but I only went back, to 2012, I think. Let me
Right.
see, where did I go back? 2011.
Hmm.
I was looking more recent tendencies,
Right.
and almost all these trades: February, March, February, March 1st, February, like they're
Right.
all
Trade
then. And
deadline.
and the interesting thing is, Bruce, in that time period, he starts out 2012 to 2015, and he's the guy.
Right.
He's picking up that defenseman Marek Zidlicki or Kyle Quincy, or a forward
38,
David.
38-year-old Marek Zidlicki.
Yeah, but then after that, he moves to the. He shows he can go the other, do the other thing, and he becomes the seller at the
Absolutely.
deadline. And every year for those following years, he's selling, trading out some good players: Thomas Tatar, Gustav Nyquist, Brendan Smith, who is seen as a good player. I mean, and some of those trades were pretty good, Bruce. He got
Oh, yeah,
a second and a third round pick for Brendan Smith, who had a $4 million a year contract that I think is just up now, and he's not done well in New York. Man, that was a great move, getting rid of him. Of course, Holland's moves in Detroit in that last little part were not so good, as witnessed by Detroit's kind of historic, one of it, like, just such a stinker year this year, that the team in those last years really did go down. But at least he was making the right moves to improve it, like getting rid of players that he could to get draft picks for the future.
Well, I mean, he hollowed the team out and did the rebuild thing. And this year they kind of reached the nadir of the rebuild. In terms of the bottom falling out and them being really terrible. And they're going to get at least one very high draft pick out of that. But a couple things happened. I mean, first of all, they had that epic 25-year playoff run.
Yeah.
Uh, and right up to 2016, they were always in the hunt, and they were always looking to consider themselves buyers at the trade deadline, even when it became evident they were a faint echo of the team they had been. But a key underlying factor there, now literally underlying, if you want to push the metaphor, Mike Ilitch, the owner of the team, who was dying throughout the early part of the decade. And I was envisioning the scenario where I'm Ken Holland and I'm going to tell the dying owner that, hey, listen, sorry, Mike, I know you like this guy, but we decided we're going to do a full rebuild and trade him off for draft picks. And 4 or 5 years, we're going to be better for it. I mean, it just never happened. And the table that I've drawn up shows that great divide that you talked about, with a black bar where Mike Ilitch dies on February 10th of 2017. And within 3 weeks, he traded Thomas Jurcho, Brendan Smith, Thomas Vanek away from the Red Wings. And then the next year, he traded Peter Mrazek and Thomas Tatar away from the Red Wings. And the deadline after that, his last in Detroit, he traded Nick Jensen and Gustav Nyquist away from the Red Wings. And he got a bushel of draft picks, a couple of young defense prospects, totally different from his usual 35-year-old guy. He went for, 23-year-old Dylan McIlrath and 24-year-old Madison Bowie, I think, around those ages. And every year, like, they had 6, 7, 8 picks in the top 100 of the draft. Now, that's in the 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21 drafts. Those picks haven't come home to pay dividends yet, but that they're flooding the system with young players. And so when the shoe finally came onto the other foot after 25 years of Detroit being a good team, it was like Holland flipped a switch. And the other thing I noticed was all those guys he traded, with the exception of Thomas Vanek, Yurcho, Smith, Mrazek, Tatar, Jensen, Nyquist, every one of them was a draft pick of the Red Wings, developed by the Red Wings, came up through Grand Rapids, played 2 or 3 years in Grand Rapids, just like his master plan. They came up, they played in the Red Wings system, and they established themselves as um, uh, desirable at the trade deadline. The teams wanted. They say, "Oh, that guy came up through the Detroit system, and he's got, and so Detroit got, 6, 7 years out of these guys as productive players, And just when when their contracts were coming up, and they were probably going to lose them, Ken Holland was able to turn all these guys over into just a bushel of first, second, third round picks. So uh, when the shoe was on the other foot, he wore it. And then this year coming to Edmonton, he immediately went back into buyer's mode because the team was in a playoff position, and he made trades for three guys at the deadline, and every one he gave away picks. So it was just the same trade, but in reverse. He was in the other chair.
That was a really insightful comment you've just made about Holland's record with Illich, and this has been talked about before. He's alluded to it as well. That he felt this pressure being in the playoffs all those years in a row to keep winning and keep winning for that owner.
Right.
And you're right. Like, man, that really is a demarcation point when Illich dies. Just the change of direction, because he didn't make
180.
Yeah, he was still buying at the deadline at 2016. Traded a third round. No, that was in May.
2015. He was the last time he tried. That was when he bought 36-year-old Eric Cole and 38-year-old Marek Zablitchi.
He didn't really do anything at the 2016. So you could see probably he's thinking, oh, I really want to unload some guys. Maybe, I'm just imagining this now, but you can imagine, having the owner who wants to keep winning somehow, and the GM maybe wants to move out some guys, but it's not yet possible. And it does put a different spin on that year, but it also, like, in terms of Holland's motivation, the fire to show that he can still do it.
Yeah.
He might have felt in his last 5 years and recognized that just the circumstances and dynamic on a number of different levels, both personal and the way the league is structured, worked against him, and he couldn't do his best work. He didn't do his best work, but he couldn't. Of course, it's really hard. Like, we know from I keep referring to this great book, Ken Dryden's book, Scotty, where he talked about the Canadiens dynasty. And every era where the NHL changes its rules on drafting, player procurement, contracts, the great team and the great GM has to change his tactics completely and come up with a whole new set of tactics that help you win. And it's never been harder, I don't think, right now than to maintain a winning team than it is right now. It's so much more difficult than it was in the 60s. For one thing, there's way more teams, but the 60s and the 70s, and the 80s with the Oilers, where you had players, you had their rights forever, essentially. Yeah. And it's very, very difficult now. So I don't know if any GMs have the market cornered on wisdom on what exactly to do right now. I think it's never been more kind of up in the air what best practices are. But I think Holland showed a few things with the Oilers that shows that he's not past his A game is still there.
But his preference clearly is, let's do the deal that makes sense for both sides. I can talk to the guy in the other position and say, well, here's what I got that's going to help you. Here's what you've got that's going to help me that you don't need right now because you're not even in the playoffs, or vice versa. But the one-for-one deal where each guy is trying to get the better player out of the other team, the more kind of competitive deal, that's not really his forte. So that's where the fact he was able to pull off this Lucic deal right off the bat is he was right out of his comfort zone when that trade happened, but it happened.
Yeah, in his last 7 years in Detroit, he made just one real player for, well, no, there's two. He made the David Legwand for Calle Yarncroc and Patrick Eaves trade. And that probably wasn't a very great trade. That was a bad trade. And then he made the Eric Cole for Matthias Backman and Matthias Janmark trade. So yeah, that's not what he does. And the Lucic trade, well, even though it's good that you can teach an old dog new tricks, because that was one hell of a trade, Bruce. That was one hell of a trade. And the Oilers aren't even going to lose their third round draft pick, it looks like. So.
That wasn't even player for player in the end, David. It was really contract for contract. So it's on a whole other level.
Yeah.
This was the kind of trade that would never have to be made in the 1998. So in that sense, going back to there to compare, you wouldn't find anything that compared to the kind of salary cap hell. In 98, Detroit could have $100 million in salaries on their payroll, and there was no problem and they practically did a couple of years. I'm sure they were over $80 million.
Yeah, they would have just had Lucic as a fourth line grinder, and that would have been it, right?
So send him down or what have you.
Down, yeah. All right. Anything else that you're going to be writing about? Any other?
I may have take a run at the contracts that Holland's done. I know you did at the time that he came to the Oilers. You looked at both these things, and my take has been, well, let's see what he does in his first year in Edmonton and sort of roll that into how he's done over time. And of course, by now, he's made those half dozen trades as Oilers GM. He's made the 5 or 7, depending on how you count them, contract extensions of players that he signed, either Chase Hunt and Kara last summer, or the 5 guys he signed throughout the course of this season, starting with Caleb Jones, also Zach Cassian, Gustav
Nurse.
Shinpad, and of course the big Darnell Nurse deal was the capper on that. But he's already got 5 of those contracts signed. And he's got another handful, in his inbox right now. So it might be interesting to look at the deals that are done and the ones that are still hanging in the air and sort of have a quick look at each one. So I'm thinking there may yet be a part 5 of the Holland Post. I find him fascinating. I've really found this interesting to just see how systematic and professional he is and how consistent he is in his dealings with players and presumably agents, other GMs. Like he is who we thought he was.
There was a lot of disrespect for Holland when he came here from a lot of different quarters. From Oiler, factions of Oiler fans, there was huge amount of doubt. And
what were his peers saying around the NHL? I bet there's a lot of respect for that guy.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I guess my only concern was, like, how old is he now?
He's younger than me, David, by a month.
Yeah,
so he's my contemporary now. The only one left. I'm rooting hard for him.
Yeah, but you're not running an NHL team.
No,
all due respect.
No.
So it takes a tremendous amount of energy. My only concern, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that work, and it's just hard dog work. You got to really, really want it. You have to have the fire in your belly. And it was interesting for him, like you do, Bruce, at your age, in our particular walk of life. But I didn't know, right? Like, you just wonder, does he really have it? And he said he did, and he said that's why he took the job, and it was good. Seems to be working out so far. So,
well, he's been very consistent, and I mean, he said, I think in the Post you said you got to get more right than wrong. You're never going to get them all right, and every once in a while they're going to mess up, and you're going to trade Callie Yarncroc and Patrick Eves and a pick for David Legwand and pay David Legwand, and it's all going to go sideways on you. But he got a lot right too in there, and he and there wasn't a lot of deals where he gave away a player who then went on to really devastate them by becoming something, by becoming, reaching another level. So he got value for what he gave up for the most part.
I remember hearing once something like that raw human intelligence, like just our horsepower, is never greater than like between the ages of about like 20 and 35.
Mm-hmm.
But human wisdom is never greater than between 50 and 70. So he's still in that ballpark, and he seems like he knows what he's doing. All right, Bruce, let's talk about the Scoring Chance project that you and I were involved in this year. We reviewed by video all grade A chances for and against the Oilers. There was about 10 for, 10 grade A chances for per game, and about 10 grade A chances against, roughly. With the Oilers, they were pretty even in that category. So one of the things we did this year, it's really the first time, as long as I've been doing the Scoring Chance project, I keep learning new things. I mean, I don't have any kind of training in science, right, and how to do this stuff properly. So it's taken me a while to figure it out, but and how to track the results properly. But so now we've done a lot of coding with our results, so we can easily track. We not only track the mistakes that the players make, we track their what kind of mistake did they make? Did they just allow a pass into the slot or allow a slot shot, which are kind of the basic mistakes. Those are the two most common mistakes. Is you You get beat.
Get
You
beat.
allow the pass, you allow the shot. But then there's other kinds of mistakes. Turnovers, lost battles, missed assignments, bad line changes, weak back checks, bad pinches, and allowing a breakaway. Which we all just we thought let's break out some categories and see what we did, and we coded it so you can searchable and easily you can add it up instead of like I did track this stuff in the past. I could just never
Mhm.
add it up because I didn't have the
Yeah,
coding.
we always had much of the same lingo. I mean, we talked about hard charges at net and
Yeah,
weak back checks and some of these same words. But this year we picked a handful at each end, for and against, and maybe 10 different ways that players could contribute, good or bad, and coded them so that you can now search for the code, and you're going to find uh, all the plays for a certain player. As long as we didn't make a coding error, right? But I mean, we're going to get almost all of them in there, and
and,
some interesting results here, David.
and I should say if anyone listening to this just wants the raw data, we've published it many times, and just email me or contact me on Twitter, and I'll send you the link because it's anyone can search it for whatever they want. As far as I'm concerned, that's what it's there for. So the process this year was I would usually be me. I would not always, but I would usually do the first assessment of the game, and then you would do a second assessment of all the scoring chances and the assignments,
Right.
and essentially we would usually generally agree, but in 20% of the cases, whatever there'd be a disagreement, we discuss it, and then you would have the final say, the veto. So it was kind of double subjective, like it took away some of my subjectivity and replaced it with your own, but we were hoping to balance out that subjective element that way. All right. So what we're left with we're going to talk about the defenseman today, and just generally speaking, when it came to mistakes against at even strength, two defensemen stood out as being superior to the other defensemen at even strength, and one of them especially stood out because he played hard minutes. And this is, I think, if I was to make an argument, who is the most underrated Edmonton Oilers hockey player? It's and this includes me underrating this player.
Hmm.
Adam Larsson is the most underrated Edmonton Oilers hockey player. He made the fewest major mistakes on grade A chances against an even strength. He made 1.11 per 15 minutes, which I say is per game. It's kind of a synonymous for a game, 15 minutes
Even
equivalent.
strength. Pretty
Close
close. Yeah.
enough. So 1.1 per game. And next best, Chris Russell, 1.2 per game only. And all the other defensemen are around 1.4. Jones 1.42, Jones, Clefbaum 1.47, Nurse 1.47, Bear 1.57, Benning 1.55. So
Right.
they're all between 1.4 and 1.6, and Larsson's considerably lower. That's a very significant difference. He Bruce, he is a solid defensive hockey player, and I think if the Oilers were to lose him at this point, and it's a possibility with the expansion draft coming up, man, they'd be thinking we need another nasty, mean, safe, tough, effective defensive defenseman like Adam Larsson.
What jumps off the screen here with him is, I mean, when he does get beat, he allows a pass or he gets shot, the shooter gets away on him, gets the shot away. And as you say, those are kind of the fundamental things. I mean, at the other end, we're counting passes into the slot and shots from the slot. So this would be the equivalent of that. But when it comes to mistakes like turnovers, I mean, he had two that we counted, two turnovers that were turned into a grade A chance for the other team. And this compares to numbers like 12 for Clefbaum, 17 for Bear, 17 for Nurse. I mean, these are huge discrepancies. Similar with lost battles where defenders were Bear, Clefbaum were over 20. Again, two for Larsson, where we by our hello kitty, by our standards of of counting, that Larsson lost a battle that resulted in a shot or just one missed assignment. And again, I mean, these are subjective ratings, but you and I are both looking at these things, and a missed assignments when the guy kind of blows it and he's just out of position. And Adam Larsson, that was not uh, a common problem for Adam. So uh, he kind of looked after. This tells me he looks after the details of the game and uh, the meat and potato stuff. Maybe he gets beat the same rate as the other guys, but he doesn't give away much for free.
The coach has to love that. I mean,
Yeah,
look at his turnovers.
yeah,
2 turnovers
yeah.
leading to grade A scoring chances against, whereas Nurse is at 17, Bears at 17, and Clefbaum 12. Now they
Right.
all played a bit more time, quite a
Not
bit more
much.
time on ice, but not
Yeah.
double.
Okay. He missed. Yeah, he did miss
But
a few weeks, right?
he just he just doesn't make that play and lost battles. Bruce, he
Mhm.
had he had 892 even strength minutes. He had 2 lost battles, leading to grade A chances against, whereas Clefbaum had 22, Bear 21, Nurse 13. Now, so Nurse, I'll give time on ice. Nurse 1,445, Bear 1,375, and Clefbaum 1,011, 1,196. So they played a bit more, but 2 compared to 21 or 22 in
Yeah.
terms of lost battles. Like, man, he's fundamentally solid. He's got sound defensive position. He has it consistently, and no wonder the coach likes. I think Cat.
Well,
No,
Jim Playfair and Larsson maybe got on the same page too. Like I'm not sure Larsson didn't continue to improve this year as it went along. Hello, Kitty. So but he sure didn't give away much for free, and that's my takeaway from this chart.
yeah, all the Bear, Clefbaum, and Nurse, their numbers are all really similar in a lot of ways. There's not a lot to pick from there. What I noticed is generally the bottom defensemen, the top defensemen are more prone to making turnovers.
Hmm.
And the one other thing that did stand out was Joel Persson. And if you're ever wondering why Joel Persson never made it, his rate of making turnovers per game, leading to grade A chances, was almost double. Like
Right.
he was like 0.3 per game, where other guys are at 0.15, 0.7, or 0.07. He just made way too many, and his lost battles is also extremely high. He just
Right.
wasn't defensively close.
Hmm.
This really, it just jumps out at you on these kind of plays that drive a coach crazy. He was making them all the time, and not surprising that he didn't last with Dave Tippett. They gave him a shot. They gave him 195 even strength minutes, but he just these turnovers, lost battles. He just couldn't cut it.
If you're a great puck mover, you can live with some
Yes,
of that. But
yeah.
he never came across as and like he was efficient moving the puck and that, but he didn't ever come across as being a plus plus offensive or even breakout passer or anything. And his weaknesses in the defensive zone that we kind of feared when he came over. Having played in the third division in Sweden as recently as a couple of years previous. Um, and they did get exposed to some degree, and I think our analysis puts some numbers on that. I mean,
The other number. Go ahead. Sorry.
two mistakes per 15 minutes. He was like a point 0.5 ahead of all the other guys or behind him.
And again, Larsson, the team leader, was at 1.1 per 15, and
Yeah,
he's at 2. And the worst guy on the team, a small sample size, was Brandon Manning in 99 minutes, 2.4.
we
I
better
just
trade for that guy.
I couldn't believe, like, Tippett stuck with him. That was when I thought, like, don't play him ever again. Like after about
Yeah.
4 or 5 games, like it was clear he couldn't keep up, and yeah, he was just leaking grade A chances against at a brutal rate. And Mike Green, he only played 2 games, but he was at 2 per game. So I'm not I'm not sold on Mike Green yet. Well, he'll have to come in here and play a little better than he did. I don't see any argument personally at this point if they make the playoffs for playing Green in the top 6. I think it would be a big mistake, honestly. So we'll see what happens in that regard. Alrighty, Bruce. Well, I think that's it. We'll be back probably Monday, I'm guessing, for the next podcast,
Mhm.
Monday or Tuesday. But you'll be continuing on your Holland series, and I'll
All
be
right.
analyzing the forwards in terms of this
Okay.
statistic as well.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
All right. I'll be another 2, 3 days along on the COVID beard, the hermit look. I think probably there's a lot of men doing that just
Yeah.
now.
You look like Merlin Malinowski. All right. Thanks for talking, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.